Welcome to the Depth Dive. Today, our mission is to take a closer look back at 1952. We're examining a real tectonic monster, the Kamchatka earthquake and tsunami. Now, this event, it happened in a pretty remote place, often overshadowed by, later tragedies, but it really demonstrated this brutal transoceanic reach of geological power. And this was long before we had the kind of global warning systems we rely on now. When we discuss global risk today, the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami often comes up, right? A truly catastrophic event highlighted the desperate need for preparedness. Cost something like, 35,000 lives just in Sri Lanka, displaced hundreds of thousands more. But this 1952 Kamchatka disaster, it gives us a picture of that same kind of colossal energy hitting an isolated region, and then, impacting a world that was largely unprepared for something on that scale coming across the ocean.
Precisely. And to really grasp the consequences, you have to start with the sheer magnitude of the engine driving it all. We're talking about an earthquake centered deep beneath the sea, just off Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula, far eastern Russia. It really defined the scale of threat for the entire Pacific Rim.
Okay, let's get into that engine room then. What were the exact specs, the numbers that kicked off this monumental event? We know it was a Richter 9.0, which is just an unimaginable amount of energy. But tell us more about the specific location, the coordinates, and critically, to depth. Where did this thing start?
Right. The raw technical details really defined its potential impact. Magnitude 9.0 on the Richter scale, that's huge. The epicenter itself was located at 52.8 degrees north latitude and 159.5 degrees east longitude, smack bang on that really active seismic boundary. That's where the Pacific Plate dives, or subducts, beneath the Eurasian Plate. People often call it the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench System, a known hotspot. And what's also key here is the depth. The focus, it was relatively deep, actually, around 30 kilometers down. Now, sometimes a shallower rupture causes more intense shaking right nearby, but a deep focus M9.0 like this, it guarantees a massive, sustained displacement of water over a really wide area. Basically, a perfect tsunami generator.
Yeah.
It can send destructive waves across an entire ocean basin.
That's a fascinating distinction. So that 30-kilometer depth, did it cushion the near-field impact at all? Or did the sheer scale, the M9.0, just overcome any kind of moderating effect? Because the destruction nearby was, immediate and absolutely brutal, wasn't it?
Yeah, the scale of the rupture itself pretty much overpowered any moderation from the depth. It ensured devastation right there in the near-field zone, the Kamchatka Peninsula, the Kuril Islands. And interestingly, reports indicate the second and third waves were often particularly damaging around Kamchatka. So the initial push of water wasn't necessarily the final or even the worst blow.
Right. And this is where the local geography, the shape of the coastline, the underwater bathymetry, that must have dictated where the worst destruction hit. What kind of wave measurements are we talking about in those immediate areas? I mean, what was the maximum localized energy transfer?
Well, the heights varied wildly, really depending on the local topography, the shape of the bays and coastline. Around the Kurnotsky Peninsula area, for instance, waves were measured at about 5 meters high. But as you track along the coast, say from Kurnotsky toward Shapersky Point, the heights jumped around dramatically, anywhere from 4 meters all the way up to 13 meters. But the truly shocking figures, I think, come when we look south towards the Kuril Islands. Paramashir Island, it's a key part of that chain. It experienced wave heights that range from 4 meters up to an astonishing 18.4 meters.
18.4 meters.
18.4, yeah. To put that in perspective for you listening, that is roughly the height of a 6-story building. Imagine that wall of water moving at highway speed towards the shore.
Wow, an 18-meter wall of water. That's just crushing power. And these waves moved incredibly fast, didn't they?
Oh, extremely fast.
We know the tsunami reached Avichinskaya Point in only 30 minutes. And the first wave took just 42 minutes to get to Olga Bay. There would have been virtually no warning for people in those coastal communities, just none. So when you put all that devastation together, the immediate human cost in far eastern Russia, covering Kamchatka and the Kurils, it was catastrophic. The sources we looked at estimate a staggering loss of life somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 people. That's the terrible regional toll of an M9.0 in an unprepared area.
Absolutely. A catastrophic regional tragedy. And it really speaks to the power of those localized waves when they hit populated coastal areas without any timely warning or, frankly, any robust defenses back then.
Right. That regional toll is just immense. But what's genuinely fascinating about this event, scientifically speaking, is how that energy just leaped across the entire ocean. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, this wasn't just a catastrophe confined to the Russian Far East, was it? These waves traveled thousands and thousands of miles across the Pacific. What areas felt the impact on the other side?
Oh, the trans-Pacific reach of the 52 wave was, comprehensive. It wasn't just a ripple. Thousands of miles away, areas that suffered measurable impact included really the whole stretch of the North Pacific. You're talking the Hawaii Islands, Alaska, the Aleutian Islands, and even down the coast into California. And the energy didn't stop there. Less severe, but still measurable wave action traveled much further towards South America, hitting Peru and Chile, and even reaching New Zealand and Oceania, although severe damage wasn't reported that far south.
Okay, let's focus on Hawaii for a second. Thousands of miles from the epicenter, what was the fallout there? Because the consequences were measured quite differently, not really in human lives, but more in damage to infrastructure and, oddly enough, livestock.
That's right. Despite the immense distance and the fact this was 1952, well before modern warning systems, Hawaii reported no human lives lost, which is remarkable, really. However, the damage to infrastructure was extensive. We see reports mentioning major damage to boats and harbors, telephone wires down, general damage to coastal structures, piers, that sort of thing. And yes, as you mentioned, strangely specific but tragically, 6 cattle were reported perished.
It's such a stark comparison, isn't it? Over 10,000 human lives lost near the source, and 6 cattle lost thousands of miles away. It just highlights the difference distance and maybe local factors make. But looking at the financial side for Hawaii, our sources actually give wildly conflicting estimates for the damage. Some figures suggest a massive $17 million loss back then. Others estimate it much lower, maybe between $800,000 and $1 million. That's a huge disparity, over $16 million difference. Why?
Yeah, that disparity is actually a key insight into studying these kinds of disasters from that era, especially during the early Cold War period. It likely reflects just how difficult it was to gather reliable, verified data quickly back then. Communications weren't instant. Damage assessment was slower. The higher figure, the $17 million, that might have been an initial, perhaps broader estimate, maybe covering uninsured private property, potential future economic losses, things like that. Whereas the lower figure, the $800K to $1 million, that could represent a more controlled, maybe government-verified tally focused on immediate damage to public infrastructure. It really shows us that even nailing down the financial scope of major disasters in the 1950s was, well, subject to interpretation and data challenges.
That makes a lot of sense. It contextualizes those numbers perfectly. Okay, so moving north from Hawaii, Alaska also registered effects, right? Still far from the epicenter. What happened up there?
Yes, Alaska definitely felt the effects, although on a much smaller, more localized scale compared to Kamchatka, obviously. In Arakport, for example, which is out in the Aleutians, reports said banks overflowed. But no major structural damage was noted there. Attu, another Aleutian island, also recorded some minor flooding associated with the wave action. Small impacts, but confirmation the energy reached that far north.
And then even further down the coast, all the way to the U.S. mainland, California still registered conditions. That really confirms the whole Pacific Basin was basically activated by this single event.
Exactly. California saw what were described as minor tsunami conditions. Crescent City, which has unfortunately seen worse tsunamis since then, reported 4 boats overturning and sinking in '52. Minor damage overall, but it proves the energy made it that far south and east. And further south, in Santa Cruz, there was some reported damage to a fishing vessel launcher on a pier. So these distant, kind of scattered impacts, they really confirm the incredible global spread of energy from that single Richter 9.0 rupture off Kamchatka.
This really raises a critical analytical question then. Why? Why is the Kamchatka region such a consistent source for these colossal events? It seems like this scale of disaster, an M9.0 event, is tragically almost a recurring feature there, not just some isolated anomaly.
It is absolutely predictable, geologically speaking, and it ties right back to the geographical context we mentioned earlier. The Kamchatka Peninsula is situated right at a major subduction zone, where the massive Pacific plate is constantly grinding and diving beneath the North American plate. This ongoing, immense tectonic collision builds up tremendous seismic stress over decades, sometimes centuries, and eventually that stress has to be released. Periodically, it leads to these enormous rupture events, these megaquakes. It's an unavoidable feature of that particular plate boundary.
Right. So we put the 1952 event into its historical context. Looking back, was this mid-century disaster simply history repeating itself in that zone?
Very much so, yeah. We have historical records and geological evidence, too, demonstrating a long history of powerful, even M9.0 scale events in this exact same zone. For example, back in 1737, the region suffered what's estimated to be a magnitude 9.0 quake, and the focus depth was around 40 kilometers, remarkably comparable in scale and depth, actually, to the 1952 event.
Wow. 1737. So that's a nearly 2-century-long recurrence interval, roughly, for the absolute maximum kind of event in that region. And even closer to 1952, there were those two major events in 1923, which now seem like a grim precursor.
Indeed they were. On February 4th, 1923, there was a major quake. Estimated magnitude somewhere between 8.3 and 8.5, still massive. And that one generated a powerful tsunami too, with waves up to 8 meters high locally. It caused considerable damage right there in Kamchatka. And here's a really critical point for our deep dive, connecting the dots across the Pacific again. That 1923 tsunami from the M8.5 quake traveled across the ocean and caused a significant 6-meter wave in Hawaii. And tragically, that wave resulted in the deaths of several people there in Hawaii in 1923.
Wait, okay. That is a critical point. So the 1923 M8.5 event did cause fatalities in Hawaii, but the bigger M9.0 event in 1952 did not cause human fatalities there. Why the difference in the human toll nearly 30 years later, despite a larger earthquake?
That is the crucial insight, isn't it? It was likely a combination of factors. While the 1952 wave generated by the M9.0 was immense, the specific characteristics of that rupture, maybe the wave period or the way the energy propagated, might have lessened its destructive impact on populated harbors in Hawaii compared to the 1923 wave. But also, crucially, the sources hint that maybe even rudimentary communication improvements over those 30 years, perhaps better coastal awareness, even without a formal warning system like today's. Those might have played a role in saving lives in Hawaii in 1952 compared to 1923. The Pacific Basin was perhaps slowly learning lessons the hard way.
Learning lessons, yes. And the ground itself wasn't quiet even right after that big 1923 quake, was it? There was more activity almost immediately.
Correct. Just 2 months after that major February quake in 1923, in April of the same year, there was another, separate, more localized tsunami affecting a place called Kamchatsk. Geologists have actually studied the layers of silt and mud deposited by that specific localized wave since then. It just confirms the constant, intense tectonic activity of the zone. This area is just constantly under threat. It's always moving.
Okay, so let's try to quickly review the core takeaway here. The 1952 Kamchatka event was just this dramatic, truly destructive demonstration of trans-Pacific energy. You have a single, massive Richter 9.0 quake starting 30 kilometers deep off remote Russia. But it was powerful enough to directly link that spot to catastrophic loss of life locally, thousands of people, and also measurable infrastructure damage thousands of miles away in places like Hawaii and California. It's just such a powerful reminder of how interconnected our planet's active geology makes the entire Pacific Rim.
It certainly is. And as we've discussed, the threat there is persistent. It's documented 1737, 1923, 1952. These massive events keep happening. Now, we know the 1952 waves traveled as far as Chile and New Zealand, apparently without causing severe reported damage that far out. But consider the geological frequency of these huge quakes in Kamchatka. And then reflect again on the maximum recorded local impact, that 18.4-meter wave height measured at Paramushir Island, right near the source. What does that specific, frankly terrifying local measurement tell you? What does it suggest about the absolute maximum potential danger facing any coastal community on the entire Pacific Rim the next time this incredibly active tectonic boundary ruptures on that scale, that potential, that raw power? That's really what every city, every community facing the Pacific Ocean must always contend with.